Why did these tigers protect a dog? Everyone left to die. In the blistering silence of the desert, chained beneath a rusted fence, a once legendary police dog named Orin stared into the storm. His fur was matted, his body thin, but it was his eyes alert, grieving, waiting, that unsettled every soul who dared meet them. No one came for him. Not the city he saved, not the officers he'd served beside, not even the man whose son he tried to keep alive. But when the fences fell, and 7 fully grown tigers escaped into the sanctuary's dust-filled chaos, something unthinkable happened. They didn't attack him. They stood beside him. This isn't a fantasy, this is a story of what happens when we discard loyalty, and how nature sometimes remembers better than we do. The Mojave sun was still hours from reaching its peak, yet already the air shimmered like a mirage over the cracked earth surrounding Red Echo Wildlife Reserve. A lonely wind pushed through the brittle Joshua trees and over the skeletal remains of animal enclosures long since abandoned, carrying with it a silence that felt too deliberate, like the desert was holding its breath. At the far southern edge of the property, beyond the visitor paths and tourist kiosks, sat a chain-link pen that wasn't listed on any map. The sign that once labeled it had rusted into illegibility. There, beneath a patch of dried shade and clinging dust, a German shepherd lay tethered to a steel stake driven deep into the hard-packed earth. His name, once spoken with reverence in disaster zones, whispered like a prayer among rescue teams, was Orin. The chain around his neck was industrial strength, the kind used for securing large gates, not animals. It had rubbed a raw patch into the thick fur beneath his collar, where a pair of scratched military K9 tags still dangled and chimed faintly in the wind. His body, though lean and muscular, showed signs of long neglect. Ribs pressed against his taut skin. A faded scar traced his flank like a silent story too painful to tell. But it was his eyes that betrayed what remained amber-colored, deep, unflinching. They tracked the horizon not with hope, but with calculation. Not with fear, but with the steadiness of something that had known war and still chose to wait. Behind him, separated by only a reinforced fence and a crumbling cement trench, loomed the tiger enclosure. 10 acres of manufactured wilderness where 7 Bengal tigers roamed. In the heat, they lay like gods draped over boulders and under shade, golden fur twitching occasionally at insects. Most kept to themselves, except for one. A female tiger, larger than most, with a torn left ear and watchful eyes, lingered at the far end of the fence, almost always near where Orin was chained. She didn't snarl or pace. She watched, calmly, quietly, as if recognizing something buried beneath the dog's matted coat and iron chain. Orin never barked at her, never growled, never flinched. They simply coexisted, an unspoken pact, a silent rhythm. It wasn't peace, but it wasn't war either. At this hour, Red Echo seemed like a memory of itself. The educational signs were sun-bleached and curling. The souvenir shop, once filled with plush toys and novelty mugs, was shuttered, its windows coated in dust like eyes that had stopped blinking. Few visitors came now. The sanctuary that once made headlines for exotic rescues and humane rehabilitations had grown hollow, like a house that still stood only because no one had the heart to knock it down. But the animals remained. They always did. And among them was Orin, once hailed as the dog who walked through fire in a flooded Tennessee town. The same dog who had, years earlier, pulled a crying infant from the rubble of an earthquake in Mexico City with nothing more than instinct and resolve. Now he lay tethered and half forgotten, his breath shallow beneath the weight of sun and silence. His ears flicked at a sound in the distance, boots on gravel. Not frantic, not panicked, measured. A minute later, Marcus, the sanctuary's aging groundskeeper, stepped into view. He moved like an old tree and wind-slow but deliberate. His khaki uniform was stained with oil and dust. A thermos clinked gently at his hip. In one hand he carried a metal bowl of water, and in the other a torn paper bag holding what smelled faintly like leftover stew meat. "Morning, soldier," Marcus grumbled softly as he knelt beside the dog. Orin didn't move, but his eyes tracked the man with subtle recognition. "I brought the good stuff today," Marcus continued, opening the bag. "Don't tell the boss he thinks you're a liability, calls you a ghost chained to the fence. But I've seen ghosts. You ain't one." Marcus poured the water into the bowl and set it close to the chain's edge. Orin shifted barely, but enough to reach it. He drank slowly, precisely, like a soldier on limited rations, never wasting a drop. "Damn sun's getting meaner," Marcus muttered. "Storm's coming, too. Sky's been acting funny. Birds left early. That's never a good sign." Orin looked up then, just a tilt of the head, just enough for Marcus to see those eyes again. "You know it too, don't you?" the old man whispered. "Something's gonna break." He stood, wiped his hands on his pants, and reached out, hesitantly, to scratch behind the dog's ears. Orin didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. A truce. That's all they had. Marcus sighed. "If I had it my way, you wouldn't be chained here, but the world stopped asking what I wanted a long time ago." He looked once more toward the tiger enclosure. The torn-eared female was still watching, always watching. As Marcus walked back up the gravel path toward the main buildings, the sun continued its slow rise, turning the sky from gray to white-hot gold. Dust curled in lazy spirals. The air thickened with electricity, not yet visible, but humming. Red Echo was still asleep, but something beneath it had started to stir. Not in the cages, not in the wind, but in the silent place where things remembered their former selves, where old soldiers waited for orders that would never come, where beasts forgotten and feared began to whisper across fences. And beneath that whisper, a heartbeat still thumped, tethered, exhausted, defiant. Orin's chest rose, and the desert listened. At precisely 6:00 a.m., the front door of the administrative cabin creaked open, as it always did, worn hinges protesting against desert dust and time. Marshal Lynn stepped out like the desert itself had conjured him, sharp-edged, weathered, and carved hollow in the middle. He wore his usual pressed gray shirt, sleeves rolled exactly 2 turns, creased khakis, boots that hadn't known polish in weeks but were always clean of mud. His every movement spoke of ritual, not comfort. Even the mug in his hand, black enamel, no logo, no slogan, matched his presence. Functional, unfeeling, finished, long ago. He paused on the top step of the porch, scanning the grounds as if expecting betrayal in every tree. A kestrel cried in the distance. The wind stirred dust devils across the empty parking lot. And behind the glass of the admin office, a single framed photograph caught the rising light. In it, a young man grinned, lean, uniformed, his arm around a German shepherd with bright, intelligent eyes. Nathan Reyes and Orin. Marshall didn't look at the picture, not anymore. He walked the reserve like a man walking a factory floor, checking for cracks, liabilities, inefficiencies. He noted the slumped signage by the prairie dog exhibit, the feed barrels stacked unevenly near the aviary. 2 interns hurried past him without eye contact. They didn't dare speak unless spoken to. Everyone knew the rules. He stopped only when he reached the far fence line, the one no guests ever saw, no brochures ever mentioned. There, tethered to the iron stake just out of reach of shade, lay Orin. Marshall said nothing at first. He simply stood with arms folded, studying the dog like a malfunctioning machine. "You still breathing?" he muttered, not as a question. Orin didn't move. His eyes stayed forward, locked somewhere in the distance, refusing to acknowledge the man behind him. He made no growl, no tail flick. He'd learned this man did not operate on kindness, and that silence, true, empty silence, was sometimes the only defense. Marshall stepped closer, boots crunching the gravel. The wind flared, catching the corner of his shirt. He crouched, not low enough to be level with Orin, but low enough to inspect the metal collar biting into the dog's neck. The edges were sharp. The chain was tight. Deliberately so. "You cost me a lot," he said under his breath. "More than you'll ever know." Orin blinked once. Not slow, not defiant, simply present. Marshall reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. He flipped it open and scribbled something, a supply count, a note to replace the northern fence camera. Orin wasn't even worth a line. He stood, looked toward the tiger enclosure. Suri, the torn-eared matriarch, was already watching, head lifted slightly from her shaded alcove. Her golden eyes met his briefly, then flicked to Orin. Marshall stiffened. "You should have been put down the day they brought you here," he said, almost to himself. "But she begged, said it would give her peace." A pause. "I gave her a grave." He turned, started walking away, then stopped. For a long moment Marshall didn't move. The wind curled around him like a breath not yet exhaled. He didn't look back at Orin, not even once. Instead, he reached into his pocket and touched something no one else knew he kept, a silver service medal still pinned to its original velvet backing. Nathan's. Awarded posthumously. For valor. For dying while leading a building evacuation in Syria. For the team he saved. For the dog that stayed by his body. Long after. Marshall closed his fingers around the medal and let the moment pass. Then he dropped it back into the depths of his pocket like it burned. Inside the main building, staff watched his approach with the quiet choreography of survival. Heads lowered, clipboards rose. No one smiled. He entered his office, shut the door, and twisted the blinds closed. The framed photo still sat on the shelf across from his desk, though he never looked at it anymore. Nathan's smile seemed too big for the space now. Orin's ears stood tall in that image, eyes bright, tail mid-wag. Neither of them smiled like that anymore. Marshall sat, picked up his pen, began scanning the day's itinerary. The tiger cub from Nevada was arriving by private carrier. The donor tour was scheduled for next Tuesday, and according to the log, Dr. Quinn, the new vet, was due to check in that morning. He tapped the pen against the table. Another idealist, another bleeding heart with big ideas about compassion and recovery. Let her try. Let them all try. He'd seen enough blood and fire and empty promises to know better, especially from dogs, especially from ghosts. Outside, far across the grounds, Orin lifted his head at the sound of a low, distant rumble. A wind shift, a shift in the earth. Or something older, something approaching. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but something inside it was beginning to awaken. The tires of the silver Subaru kicked up a fine plume of desert dust as it rolled past the faded "Welcome to Red Echo Wildlife Reserve" sign its once colorful paint now bleached to ghost hues. The road curved slightly, and as the vehicle crested a ridge, the sanctuary revealed itself like an old photograph. Beautiful once, yes, but worn at the corners. Cracked concrete paths, chain-link fences, sunburnt buildings that looked like they exhaled more than they held in. Dr. Lyra Quinn tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She had read the brief, skimmed the reports. Remote desert sanctuary, exotic rescues, staff transitions, budget constraints. But no file ever captured the way silence wrapped around a place like this. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt suspended, as if something had once mattered here and was now waiting to be remembered. She pulled into the side lot, parked near the maintenance shed, and stepped out into the heat. It hit her like a wall, dry, weighty, familiar in the worst way. Lyra adjusted the sunglasses perched on her head, brushing a strand of hair back beneath her ponytail. The desert had a way of revealing everything, what was broken, what you carried, what you hadn't faced yet. And she'd brought it all with her. "Dr. Quinn?" The voice came from behind a row of tool carts. An older man in a sweat-stained button-up shirt and heavy work boots emerged, wiping his hands on a rag that looked older than she was. His name tag, barely legible, read, Marcus. "I'm Marcus. Been here since before the fences had power," he said with a half-smile. "You're the vet, then?" She nodded, offering her hand. "Lyra. And yes, as of about 4 hours and 2 wrong turns ago." Marcus shook her hand with surprising gentleness for someone whose skin felt like cured leather. "We're glad you're here. The last vet left, well, let's just say, quietly." She raised an eyebrow. "Quietly usually means dramatically." He chuckled once. "Sometimes the desert swallows people whole. Sometimes the people ask it to." They walked toward the admin building together, Marcus pushing a squeaky cart of feed sacks as he gave her a quick tour. The sanctuary stretched wide enclosures dotted across the dust and stone like islands on dry sea. The giraffe yard was empty, save for one tall shadow near a wall of rock. The aviary shimmered with broken netting. Somewhere a goat bleated in the distance like it was asking a question no one would answer. "You'll want to tread lightly around Marshall," Marcus said suddenly, voice lower. Lyra glanced at him. "The manager?" Marcus nodded. "Used to run this place with his wife, back when it had a heart. These days he runs it like a clock he doesn't want to fix. Keeps time. But no one really knows what it's counting down to." She tilted her head. "And I'm assuming he doesn't like change." "He doesn't like people," Marcus said with a wry twist of his mouth, "especially new ones." As they passed the tiger enclosure, something shifted in Lyra's periphery. A rustle, a pause in the wind. Her eyes caught on a shape tethered to a post, far at the edge of the restricted zone. A dog, a German shepherd to be exact. Big, powerful, but thin. Too thin for the frame he wore. Fur scorched along the shoulders by sun and neglect, ears twitching toward them even from across the distance. And the eyes, dear God, the eyes, they met hers across that open stretch of sand and steel with an intensity that stopped her mid-step. "Who is that?" she asked softly. Marcus didn't answer right away. He followed her gaze, then sighed like someone unsealing a memory. "Name's Orin, technically a resident, though Marshall would rather call him an asset gone bad." Lyra frowned. "He's tied. That chain's too tight. He looks dehydrated." "Don't get involved yet, Doc," Marcus warned, gently but firmly. "You've been here 5 minutes. There are things here that run deeper than they seem. And that dog, well, let's just say he's not your average stray." She didn't look away from Orin. He hadn't moved, but he hadn't looked away either. Something flickered through her memory, then floodwaters, flashing lights, a clip played during her emergency medicine rotation in Colorado. A dog moving through smoke, nose to the ground, eyes locked forward. Couldn't be. Could it? "I've seen him before," she said aloud, more to herself than to Marcus. Marcus's gaze sharpened. "Unless you've worked military K-9 units or SAR teams on the coast, I doubt it." "I volunteered during the Boulder floods," she murmured. "There was a dog they said found a kid buried under 4 feet of mud. They said he could hear a heartbeat through debris." Marcus's silence said enough. They moved on, but Lyra's thoughts didn't. As she stepped into the admin office, where the air smelled like stale coffee and resignation, she carried with her more than just the weight of the desert. She carried a question. Why is a dog like that chained like a prisoner? And more importantly, who would be afraid of what he remembers? The camel's breath smelled like damp hay and old regret. Lyra crouched beside the animal's massive foreleg, gently rinsing a crusted patch of skin with a saline solution. The old girl Delilah, according to her intake record, had a stubborn case of heat rash made worse by the sanctuary's declining shade options. As Lyra worked, sweat trickled from her temple down the curve of her jaw. The morning sun hadn't even peaked yet, and the heat already clung to her like a fever. "I know," she murmured, stroking the camel's flank. "This place could use more trees, or rain, or a manager who gives a damn." Delilah snorted, as if agreeing. A sudden clink beside her made Lyra glance down. Just beneath the feed trough, half buried in the dust, something metallic caught the light. She reached over, brushed it clean with the edge of her glove, and pulled it free. Dog tags. 2 of them. Scuffed, dulled, bent slightly at one corner. The chain had snapped and recurled like a broken question mark. She turned the tags over, reading aloud. K9, Orin Unit, SAR 223B, Handler, N, Reyes, US Mill, Reg, ID, 451-006-889. Her heart paused. That name, N, Reyes, it scratched at something in her mind. A newscast. A face. A photo she had seen years ago taped inside an EMT unit's locker. Search and rescue dog leads team to missing girl in wildfire. Stays with fallen handler's body until extraction. Lyra stood slowly, dust clinging to her knees. She looked across the grounds, toward the far enclosure where Orin lay under his post like a forgotten relic. There was no mistaking it now. This was that Orin, the one they'd once called Ghost with a Heartbeat, the one rescue teams described not as an animal, but as a presence. "You found them." Marcus's voice came from behind her, softer than usual. Lyra turned. The tags. They were under the trough. He walked closer, hand outstretched, but Lyra didn't hand them over. She held them against her palm like they were warm, alive. The wind tugged at the chain slightly. "Wasn't sure if they'd get lost," Marcus said, "or if maybe someone wanted them to be." "Why would anyone hide these?" she asked. He hesitated, then looked her in the eye. "Because they're a reminder." Marcus motioned for her to follow. He led her to the narrow shadow cast by the equipment shed, where the sun hadn't yet reached. There he leaned against the wall like a man who had nowhere else to rest and nothing left to lose. "He wasn't always chained like that," Marcus said. "When he first got here, he was different, watchful, quiet, but never aggressive, just alert, like he was still on duty." Lyra folded her arms. Who brought him? His handler's mother, Marcus replied. Woman named Ava Lynn. You wouldn't know it from looking at Marshall now, but back then he was married. Ava was the one who pushed to take Orin in after the funeral. Said it was what Nathan would have wanted. Her stomach twisted. Nathan Reyes. That's her son. Marcus nodded. Lieutenant, SAR officer, smart kid. Gave his life pulling civilians out of a collapsed building in Aleppo. Orin was with him when it happened. Wouldn't leave his side. He paused, voice roughening. They had to sedate Orin to remove him. Lyra looked back toward the pen. Orin hadn't moved, but his head was up now, turned slightly in their direction, watching, even from this distance. So how do you go from war hero to... She gestured toward the fence. Prisoner. Marcus looked away. Grief don't always show up with flowers and a casserole, he said. Sometimes it shows up with a lock and a chain. Marshall didn't take Nathan's death well. He blamed the mission, the war, but mostly... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Blamed the dog, Lyra whispered. Marcus nodded once. And you? She asked quietly. What do you think? He looked down at the tags in her hand. I think some ghosts haunt us because we deserve them, he said. But not that one. They stood in silence for a moment. In the distance, a bird shrieked across the sky, cutting the stillness. Lyra looked back toward Orin's post. She could just make out the faint glint of sunlight catching in his amber eyes. He hadn't broken eye contact since she found the tags. Like he remembered her, or maybe remembered what she now knew. Why haven't you cut him loose? She asked finally. Marcus sighed. Because Marshall signs the checks, and because I'm old and tired and afraid that if I push too hard I'll be the next one on a chain. Lyra didn't argue. She didn't pity him either. But something had changed. Something in the way she held those tags. Something in the way Orin stared through the fence, like a soldier waiting for a command that would never come. He wasn't just an old dog with a record. He was a living witness to a war no one remembered, to a bond no one spoke of, to a betrayal someone still couldn't forgive. Lyra closed her fingers slowly around the tags. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like someone who had just been assigned a case, one that wasn't in any file, and wouldn't end in any chart. The day didn't cool after sundown. It only changed color. The horizon burned orange behind the canyons, fading into bruised violets and dusty grays. A dry hush blanketed the Red Echo Wildlife Reserve, the kind of silence that pressed into your lungs and reminded you this was no place for softness. Lyra sat on the porch steps of the staff quarters, sleeves rolled up, boots kicked off. Her fingers toyed with the chain of the dog tags resting in her lap. The metal was warm from her palm. She hadn't let go of them since morning. Behind her the old screen door creaked. Marcus stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of something hot and too dark to be called coffee. He offered her one without a word, and sat beside her with a groan that belonged to both his knees and his history. They didn't speak for a while. Cicadas buzzed like broken radio static in the mesquites. A distant coyote yipped, and somewhere near the back fence, a tiger let out a slow, almost bored growl. Lyra took a sip, bitter, burnt, comforting. I've seen trauma before, she said eventually, but this, Orin's not just grieving. He's waiting. Marcus didn't look at her. He nodded toward the horizon, where the silhouette of the tiger enclosure could just be seen. "Some dogs never stop working," he said, "even when the job is gone, even when the person is gone." She turned to him. "Tell me the rest." He exhaled, long and heavy. "Nathan Reyes wasn't just Orin's handler," Marcus began, voice low. "They were deployed together for 5 years. Syria, Turkey, California wildfires, Haiti quake. Name a disaster, those two were already halfway into it before the press even heard." He sipped his drink. "They were legends. Nathan would find the humans, and Orin would go where even drones wouldn't. Tight spaces, rubble, collapsing beams. The dog never flinched." Lyra listened, heart clenching. This wasn't just a partner. This was a brother in fur and instinct. Marcus continued. "The last deployment was Aleppo. Civilians trapped in a 4-story building. Orin went in first, found the kids in the basement. Nathan followed. They got 5 out. Went back for 1 more. Then the roof caved." He didn't blink as he said it. Didn't need to. You could feel the rubble in his voice. Nathan was crushed. Spinal snap. Instant. Orin didn't move for 13 hours, laid across him, howled until his throat bled. Lyra swallowed hard. Jesus. They had to tranquilize him to get him off Nathan's body. The medic said it was the hardest part of the entire operation. She looked down at the tags. The name now felt heavier than steel. "And Ava?" she asked. Marcus gave a slow nod. "Ava Lynn, Nathan's mom. A good woman, strong but not hard. She was the one who insisted Orin not be euthanized or put through reconditioning. Said her son would have wanted Orin retired with dignity. So she brought him here." Marcus chuckled dryly. "She tried." Lyra turned to him. His face had changed, creased with something deeper than regret. "She had the paperwork, the permissions, even a donation lined up for his care. But she didn't count on Marshall. Didn't know how deep grief could rot a man." Lyra's brows furrowed. "He blamed Orin." "Not out loud, not directly, but—" "Yes," Marcus said. "I think he needed someone to carry the weight, someone to punish for the unbearable." The words hung there, thick, cracked, unfair. "But why chain him up?" Lyra asked, voice thin with disbelief. "Why isolate him near the predators? That's not negligence, that's personal." "It is," Marcus said simply. Then, after a beat, he added, "When Orin first arrived, Marshall called it a symbolic gesture. Said it was like leaving a flag at a gravesite. A reminder." Lyra closed her eyes, the heat of fury rising in her chest. "That's not symbolism. That's cruelty." "Depends on who you ask," Marcus said. "To Marshall, Orin's presence is a wound that never stops bleeding. He can't look at him without seeing the son he lost. And he sure as hell can't forgive a dog for surviving when Nathan didn't." They both sat quiet for a while. The desert didn't judge. After a moment, Marcus pointed toward the horizon. "See that fence line? That's where Orin stood last spring when a wildfire got within 2 miles of the reserve. Smoke everywhere. Staff evacuated. I came back to check on things. Figured I'd find the animals frantic." He paused. "But Orin, he was standing there, still, watching the fire, no leash, no panic, just waiting for a call that never came." Lyra stared at the dark shape of the enclosure, a flicker of movement, maybe just a moth near the floodlight, maybe something else. "He hasn't stopped serving," she whispered. "Even now?" "No," Marcus said. "He hasn't." The wind picked up, hot, dry, full of stories buried under sand. Lyra finished her drink and set the mug down beside her. She rose to her feet and looked out across the compound. "I want to help him," she said. Marcus didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once, solemn. "Then tread carefully. You're not just stepping on pain here. You're stepping on the memory of a ghost. Neither one of them is ready to let go." She didn't flinch. "I don't believe in ghosts," she said, "but I believe in survivors." And as she walked off into the dark toward the sleeping enclosure, the dog tags tucked into her pocket gave a soft metallic clink, like the sound of truth, buried but not forgotten. The food bowl sat untouched for the third day in a row. The wind had shifted, bringing with it the taste of coppery sand and a distant thunder that never truly came. At the far end of the sanctuary, chained near the battered fence that divided prey from predator, Orin lay curled beneath a cracked metal awning, the chain taut between his collar and a rusted pole buried in the dirt. He wasn't sleeping. He never really did. His eyes were half-lidded but alert, flickering toward every shifting shadow, every creak, every gust. The way soldiers do when the war still hums in their bones. Lyra approached quietly, holding a small dish of chicken broth and cooked rice. She crouched a few feet from him, not intruding, not demanding. Just there. "I know it's not filet mignon," she murmured, "but it's warm and real." Orin didn't move. His chest rose, fell, slow, deliberate, like someone holding the weight of time. Lyra stayed in her crouch, resting the dish just out of reach, careful not to touch the chain. "You know," she said gently, "the camels eat better than you." Still nothing. She shifted her weight, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The dog's ear twitched, barely, but his eyes never turned toward her. "You're not sick," she said quietly. "You're not even starving. You're choosing this." That truth hung in the air, bitter and sharp, a refusal not out of instinct, but of will. Lyra sat cross-legged now, not as a vet, but as someone who had seen grief refuse to speak. "I get it," she whispered. "Someone left and didn't come back." A pause. "And now the silence feels more real than voices ever did." Still, Orin didn't react. Not to her words, not to the tone, not even to the broth's scent drifting in the wind. It wasn't defiance in the aggressive sense. It was a quiet, aching resistance, a statement carved in silence. "I will not be comforted. I will not be consoled. And I will not forget." Lyra glanced at the chain, noting how the fur beneath it had thinned, rubbed raw over time, a slow erosion of dignity. She sighed. Then she remembered something Marcus had said. Not the tragedy, she knew that part now, but a detail easily missed. They used to hum when they worked. The handlers, little tunes, helped the dogs know it was safe. A strange calm came over her as she leaned back, closed her eyes, and began to hum. Low, steady, almost like a lullaby, but not one meant for children. It was the kind of tune made of gravel and routine, of long nights searching collapsed buildings, of fingers brushing ash, of hope buried under beams. She didn't know the lyrics. She didn't need them. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the rhythm, the unspoken contract between partners who trusted each other with their lives. At first, nothing changed. Then, so slight it could have been imagined, Orin's ears lifted. Not fully, just enough. He didn't raise his head. He didn't turn. But Lyra saw it. That micro-shift, that break in the stone facade. Her voice faltered, but she kept humming. The second signal came next. The dog's nostrils flared once, like someone sniffing not for scent but for memory. He blinked slowly, not at her, but into some place only he could see. Then abrupt, sharp, he let out a sound, not a bark, not a whine, just a soft exhale, like breath forced through clenched teeth. Lyra stopped humming. The silence returned, but now it was different, not empty, not hostile, just waiting. She didn't speak. She didn't reach for him. She stood slowly, leaving the dish where it was. As she turned to walk away, the metal tag on his collar caught the last beam of sun and flashed briefly, like an old medal trying to remember what it once meant. That night, back in her trailer, Lyra lay awake. She couldn't shake the look in his eyes, that flicker of recognition, the way it had surfaced like a ghost beneath ice. He hadn't looked at her like a stranger. He'd looked at her like someone asking, "Do you remember too?" She didn't yet. Not fully. But now, she wanted to. The sun hadn't yet broken through the horizon when the truck pulled in, dust swirling like breath through clenched teeth. No logo, no registration, just matte black steel and the sound of an engine that had seen too many miles and too few questions. Lyra stood at the edge of the enclosure yard, arms crossed, coat half buttoned. She hadn't been informed of any arrivals. That fact alone twisted her stomach. The back doors swung open, and inside, half-curled in a cramped cage, was something too beautiful to belong here and too still to be okay. A white Bengal cub. Rare. Illegal without permits. Endangered and barely breathing. "Where the hell is the paperwork?" Lyra demanded, stepping forward. Marshal Lynn appeared from the shadows of the loading bay, clipboard in hand, but unsigned. "No time for red tape," he said flatly. "This one's a gift. Private donor." "Private donors don't smuggle tiger cubs across state lines without a license," she snapped, brushing past him toward the cage. "He needs fluids and x-rays." "He needs display," Marshall replied coldly. "By Friday." Lyra turned sharply. "He won't last until Friday if you treat him like a damn prop." But Marshall's eyes weren't on her. They were on Orin. Tied under a patch of shade near the chain-link fence, Orin had risen to a crouch. His shoulders were tense, not alarmed, not curious. Just bracing. The sound that came from his throat wasn't loud, but it stopped Marcus dead in his tracks. A growl, low, primal, like gravel dragged across bone. The tiger cub wasn't a threat, but something in Marshall's scent, his posture, his energy, something darker, more layered than rage or pride was. Lyra knelt beside the cage, gently sliding 2 fingers through the bars. The cub didn't flinch. His eyes fluttered once, barely conscious. His ribs were sharp beneath the fur, his gums pale. He didn't need attention. He needed rescue. She stood again, facing Marshall with quiet fury. "You're going to kill him." Marshall met her gaze, expression unreadable. "Then make him camera-ready before that happens." And with that he turned and walked toward the office, his boots crunching over gravel, his authority leaving the air behind him cold and dry. Marcus waited until the truck pulled away before speaking. "That cub didn't come here legal." Lyra exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "Nothing about this place feels legal anymore." She crouched again beside the cage, whispering softly. "I'm not letting you die here, little prince. Not like this." Behind her, Orin's growl had stopped, but he hadn't relaxed. He watched the retreating figure of Marshall as if tracking a target he'd once been trained to bring down. The fur along his shoulders bristled, not from fear, but from memory. Later that afternoon, as Lyra prepared an IV drip inside the infirmary, she looked out the dusty window toward the pen. Orin hadn't moved from his post. His chain allowed only a few feet of range, but he used every inch to position himself directly between the tiger's temporary enclosure and the main trail. It wasn't protection. It was warning. He wasn't growling anymore, but he hadn't blinked in hours. The sun was at its highest when the black SUV rolled onto the gravel loop behind the Welcome Lodge. It didn't carry tourists. It carried suits. 2 men, 1 woman, polished and pressed, stepping out with the kind of detachment only money could teach. Marshall was waiting, flanked by Miguel, and the new tiger cub displayed like a trophy on a low platform draped in faux silk cloth. The cub's eyes were glassy, legs limp. A weak tremble passed through his frame, almost invisible unless you were close. Lyra stood near the infirmary door, arms folded, jaw locked. "They shouldn't see him like this," she muttered. Marcus beside her didn't answer. He already knew what this was. Not a pitch. A performance. "This is Sombra," Marshall announced with slick confidence, gesturing toward the cub as if unveiling a rare art piece. "Pure white Bengal, direct descendant of Rajiv from the Sundarbans line. Still adjusting, of course, but in 2 weeks he'll be our main draw." The woman stepped closer. "Is it supposed to be that still?" "He's resting," Marshall replied curtly. "Long trip." But Sombra's shallow breaths told a different story. His side barely rose. His tongue hung dry at the corner of his mouth. The taller man leaned down. "He's not even tracking movement." A flicker of frustration passed through Marshall's eyes. Too fast for most to catch. He turned to Miguel, hissed something under his breath. Then, too suddenly, he grabbed the cattle prod from Miguel's belt. "No!" Lyra barked. "Don't!" Too late. The prod hissed against the cub's flank. Sombra twitched violently, a feeble yelp escaping his throat. Then he slumped again, even more lifeless. The investors recoiled. "What the hell was that?" one of them spat. Lyra was already running, fury in every step. "You're going to kill him!" But someone else moved faster. Orin. The growl was different this time. Not a warning. Not a memory. It was the sound of instinct reigniting. Metal scraped rock as Orin surged forward, chain yanking taut behind him, and then snapping from its bolt like a snapped nerve. In 3 strides, he closed the gap. Marshall turned, just as the weight of 70 pounds of trained muscle collided with his arm. Orin's jaws clamped around the man's wrist. No blood, no puncture, just absolute control. A practiced, deliberate grip. A veteran's restraint. The world froze, even the wind. Marshall stared down at the German shepherd's eyes, those burnt amber orbs wide open, locked on his face, not blinking. The message was simple. You touch one more innocent, and I won't miss next time. For a moment Marshall said nothing. Then, with the back of his free hand, he swung hard. The punch cracked across Orin's jaw. The dog staggered, loosened his grip, stepped back. Not in defeat, but out of discipline. He didn't growl. He didn't run. He stood his ground, tail low, muscles tight, eyes never leaving the man who struck him. "Get him out of here!" Marshall barked, clutching his wrist, red-faced with rage. "Take him to the fence, chain him down, let him rot there." Miguel hesitated. "Sir, he didn't—" "Do it!" Lyra stepped in front of Orin. "You touch him again, and I'll report this to every federal agency I know." Marshall's eyes locked with hers, ice on fire. "Report whatever you want," he hissed. "But this animal is finished." He turned to the guests. "The demonstration's over." They didn't stay for the tour. That night, Orin was chained again, this time at the far boundary, near the tiger pens where the ground cracked and the wind screamed louder than the coyotes. No shelter, no shade, no kindness. Lyra stood just outside the gate, watching him from a distance. He didn't whimper, didn't eat, didn't even blink when she called his name. But when she whispered the word, "Soldier," his ears flicked. She knelt in the dirt. "I saw what you did," she murmured. "You didn't attack him. You restrained him." A pause. "You protected that cub, even when it cost you." Orin didn't move, but a slow, quiet exhale left his lungs, like a breath held too long finally finding release. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. The desert wasn't done yet. The call came just after 9 p.m., cutting through the stale quiet of Lyra's motel room. The motel was the kind where dust clung to the curtains, and the only light flickered from a dying fluorescent in the corner. Marcus's name blinked on the screen. Unusual. He rarely used the phone. Lyra answered on the second ring. "Marcus?" His voice came low, rushed. "It's Orin. He's chained out near the tiger enclosure." Her pulse jumped. "What? Why?" "Punishment," he spat. "Marshall's idea of a lesson for what happened earlier." There was a beat of silence. Marcus's voice dropped further. "Lyra, he won't last the night. They've got him staked to a metal post. No cover. Wind's kicking up hard. Storm's on its way." Lightning stitched the sky outside her window, illuminating the single tree bent in the motel lot. The kind of lightning that didn't just strike, it stayed, crawled like nerves across the dark. "How bad?" she asked. "I saw the sand start to swirl. The tigers are on edge. If the wind knocks the gate loose—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Lyra was already throwing on her jacket. The old Toyota truck coughed to life, its headlights barely cutting through the rising veil of dust. Lyra gripped the steering wheel as she barreled onto the dirt road, each rut a jolt through her bones. Wind screamed past her mirrors. The world outside wasn't just dark, it was moving. Sand pelted the windshield like broken glass. Visibility shrank to yards. The radio crackled and died. The Mojave was preparing to erase anything left exposed. She pressed harder on the gas. Inside the reserve, Marcus stood at the edge of the east enclosure, flashlight trembling in his hands. He'd draped a tarp over his shoulders, but the storm ripped at it like claws. Orin was still there, tied to a bent rebar post, head low, back to the wind, eyes open, a ghost in chains. Marcus muttered under his breath, "Hold on, boy." He looked over his shoulder at the sanctuary buildings, dark silhouettes swallowed by dust. He hadn't dared alert anyone else, not even Miguel, not with Marshall pacing the grounds like a landmine waiting to be stepped on. Another gust howled. The chain-link fences groaned. Something metal slammed loose in the distance. And then, headlights. Lyra's truck emerged like a phantom, tires fishtailing as it skidded to a halt. She didn't bother parking straight. She was out the door before the engine died. "Where is he?" she shouted through the gale. Marcus pointed, the flashlight beam wobbling across the dust-torn yard. "There!" She sprinted, shielding her eyes. The sand cut her skin. Her breaths came ragged. And then she saw him. Orin, staggered but upright, wind twisting around him like fire. His coat was matted with sand and blood. The chain tugged against his throat with every gust, but he stayed rooted. She dropped to her knees beside him. Hey, Orin," she whispered, voice cracking. He turned his head slightly. Recognition flickered, but he didn't wag, didn't move. He was conserving everything, every breath, every blink, for survival. Lyra reached for the collar. Her fingers fumbled in the cold. "I'm getting you out. Just hang on." The latch resisted. Her hands shook. The wind screamed again, this time with the sharp edge of metal behind it. A piece of siding from the tiger enclosure skittered across the ground, missing them by inches. Marcus shouted from the truck, "We have to move!" "I'm trying," she yelled back. The chain snapped loose with a metallic pop, and then Orin collapsed into her arms. She cradled him, dragging him into the truck's cab with Marcus's help. He groaned once low and broken, but didn't resist. Lyra pressed a blanket around his shoulders. His body was ice, his paws raw from scraping against the stone floor. "He didn't run," she whispered. "All this time, he didn't try to run." Marcus nodded, voice hoarse. "Because he doesn't know how to leave someone behind." Thunder cracked. The sky turned copper. And behind them, somewhere in the swirling dark, the tigers began to stir. The wind carried something unnatural with it that morning, something old, unfinished. Not just dust, but memory. Grief whipped into the air, sharp as grit. Lyra's truck lurched into the Red Echo entrance like it had been chased by the sky itself. The storm had thickened overnight, churning the desert into an angry sea of ochre and ash. Visibility was collapsing by the minute. She barely had time to turn off the ignition before she noticed the other vehicle. An old black sedan, paint sun-bleached, tires coated in red dust, and the license plate California veteran plates with a faint Marine Corps decal in the corner. Ava Lynn. Lyra stepped out, heart tight. A figure stood near the tiger pens, coat whipping in the wind. She didn't move like a visitor. She moved like someone who had once belonged, then was buried here. Ava hadn't been back to Red Echo in over 3 years, not since the urn. Her boots crunched over the cracked gravel as she approached the sanctuary buildings. Her eyes scanned the perimeter like they used to when she visited Nathan during his training. Only this time, there was no warmth, just calculation, just the tremor in her hands. She spotted Marshall near the admin barn back turned, giving orders to Miguel and one of the handlers. "I don't want anything loose. Reinforce the fencing with the truck cables. And get those damn sedatives ready." He turned, saw her. Everything in his face halted. Voice, movement. The storm outside had nothing on the pressure in his chest. "Ava," he said, more breath than word. "You still chain ghosts, Marshall?" Her voice was calm, ice on sand. "What are you doing here?" "I got a call. About a dog. About your son's dog. The one you've kept tied up like a broken tool." The wind hit them both, sharp, angry. A curtain of dust swept past as if nature itself paused to listen. Marshall's jaw clenched. "You mean the animal that let Nathan die?" Lyra, just arriving from the truck, froze. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but no one noticed her now. Not with what was being spoken. Ava stepped forward. "Say that again." Marshall's eyes narrowed. "He was trained to alert, to pull out. Nathan trusted him with his life. That building collapsed and Orin he didn't leave him," Ava snapped. "He never left his side. He was dug out laying over Nathan's body. You know that. But you needed a place to put the blame." The wind howled louder now, rattling siding, tossing loose hay across the lot. Clouds of dust began curling above the tiger pens like smoke. "He was the last thing Nathan touched," Marshall said. "I see that damn dog and all I hear is silence on the other end of the radio." Ava's voice cracked. "That dog mourned louder than you did." The first flecks of sand began to bite at their cheeks. Somewhere in the back enclosure a tiger roared short, confused, agitated. Metal groaned as fencing strained. Miguel came running. "Sir, wind's pushing pressure on the west gate. We might lose integrity if this keeps up." Lyra took a step forward. "We need to move the animals into shelter now. That gate isn't going to hold." But Marshall didn't move. He stared at Ava like he was still inside some memory one, where Nathan walked across the yard with that grin, Orin at his heel, young and unscarred. He blinked hard, then turned away. "Get inside," he muttered. Ava's voice rose behind him. "You're not angry at the dog, Marshall. You're angry you sent your only son into a job that could break him, and it did. You needed a villain, and the only one who came home was wearing a collar." Marshall stopped, but didn't turn. And above them the sky began to fall. Dust and fury and history, all collapsing at once. It began with a sound that didn't belong, not the wind, not the rattling tin or the groaning fences, but a snap, a hard metallic crack, followed by a scream that tore through the rising dust like a signal flare. Miguel burst through the east corridor, eyes wide, hair matted with sweat and sand. He didn't slow as he ran toward the admin barn where Marshall, Ava, and Lyra stood frozen in the weight of things unsaid. "The gate!" he shouted. "The tiger gate's open!" Silence was obliterated. Marshall turned on instinct. "What do you mean it's open?" "Pressure from the wind cables gave out. 7 are out." "7, sir?" "They're already in the south quadrant." Lyra's breath caught. Her eyes darted east toward the far pens, just faint outlines now through the storm like shadows in a dream. Somewhere out there, chained and half-starved, Orin was still near that breach, still exposed. She didn't wait. "Marcus!" she shouted, sprinting toward the truck. The old groundskeeper had already emerged from the supply shed, clutching a weather-beaten coat and keys jangling from one trembling hand. "Back fence lines compromised," he barked, "and if the tigers reach the highway—" "They won't," Lyra said, throwing open the driver's door. "Not if we get to Orin first." Ava's voice cut through the wind like a knife. "I'm coming." "No," Marshall snapped. "You're not." Ava stared him down with a fury that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with being done. "I lost my son. I'm not about to lose what's left of him. That dog stays alive, or so help me." Lyra didn't wait for approval. She slammed the truck into gear, Marcus clambering into the passenger seat as the tires spun dirt into the storm. Ava threw herself into the bed of the pickup without a word. Behind them, Marshall stood for a long moment before his voice cracked across the radio clipped to his belt. "All personnel code black. Tigers loose. Full lockdown." The drive felt like navigating through a nightmare. Visibility was down to 15 feet. The wind was no longer wind. It was a living wall of dust, debris, and rage. Broken branches flew like spears. One smacked the windshield so hard, Lyra flinched. Marcus gritted his teeth. "He's still chained to the southeast pylon. That's right near the breach." Lyra's hands tightened on the wheel. "If the tigers find him—" "He won't fight back," Marcus said quietly. "Not against them. Not anymore." Behind them, Ava pounded the cab roof. "Faster!" The truck jumped a ditch, the engine growling as they passed the collapsed shade structures. Faint roars echoed through the storm-distorted, distant, terrifying. One high, one guttural. A challenge answered. "Over there!" Marcus shouted, pointing through the swirling sand. Lyra squinted, and there he was. Orin, chained, chest heaving, coat streaked with dirt and blood, standing still, standing facing something unseen. Then she saw them, 2 tigeresses in the dust. circling. Lyra slammed the brakes. Gravel kicked up behind them like a small explosion. Ava leapt from the truck bed before it even stopped moving, hair whipping like smoke behind her. "Orin!" He didn't look back, didn't move, just growled low and even as the tigers moved around him in a half-moon arc. "They're not attacking," Marcus whispered. Lyra stepped out slowly, holding her hands up like approaching a spooked horse. "They're protecting him?" The third tiger emerged then, larger, older, his stripes like smoke over snow. The alpha. He stalked forward, slow and deliberate. Orin lifted his head. One bark, sharp, controlled, military cadence. The tiger stopped. For a moment, just a breath, the storm quieted. Enough for Ava to step beside Lyra. Her voice trembled. "They're listening to him." Lyra moved toward the chain, one step at a time. "He's holding the line." "Like always," Ava murmured. They reached him together. Orin's body shook, but he didn't waver. His eyes locked on the tiger. Not a threat, an understanding. A request. Lyra dropped to one knee, fingers finding the rusted clasp. "Hold on, boy," she whispered. "I've got you." The lock snapped open. The storm roared again. But now Orin was free. And he did not run. He simply stepped forward between the humans and the tigers. His stance unbroken. A sentinel, a soldier. The storm howled like something ancient had woken. Grains of sand scraped across Lyra's skin like shattered glass as she crouched beside Orin, her fingers fumbling at the heavy iron clasp around his neck. Each breath tasted like dust and ozone. Somewhere in the distance, metal screamed and something thudded hard and wet into the earth. But all she could see was him. Orin. His ribs heaved beneath the matted coat, streaked with dried blood and fresh bruises. One paw was cut, deep. A shard of chain link jutted from the wound, but he didn't so much as flinch. His ears remained forward, alert, his posture still that of a protector, not prey. Behind him the tigeresses stood like silent sentinels, 3 of them, each muscled and poised, their massive bodies low to the ground, forming a loose arc around him. Not a trap, a perimeter. "God," Ava whispered, stepping closer. Her voice cracked through the chaos like a prayer. "They're guarding him." Lyra didn't answer. Her eyes were on the rusted lock, on her trembling hands. The last link fell with a hard clink to the sand. Orin was free. But he didn't move, didn't lunge, didn't retreat, didn't collapse. He just stood, like he had made a decision long ago, and now all that was left was to follow through. A low, pulsing growl came from the left. They turned. Through the dust emerged something larger, slower, every step deliberate. The Alpha. He was a glacier in motion, muscles rippling under white gold fur, face scarred with old battles, eyes unreadable. He was the reason fences existed, the reason Orin had been tied out here like bait. The tigresses parted, and Orin stepped forward. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "Orin," she whispered, but the dog didn't glance back. He limped forward once, twice, and then bark, sharp, precise, a pause, bark, bark, a cadence, call and response, the same rhythm used in search and rescue, when calling into rubble, when calling for a partner, for the living. The tiger froze. For a heartbeat, time did too. The wind dropped just enough for dust to fall, just enough for the space between them to feel sacred. Then the Alpha exhaled slow and deep and sat, Not in submission, in understanding. Ava stepped closer, voice trembling. He remembers, he chooses. Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. He's commanding. A beat passed. Orin turned his head slowly, meeting Lyra's gaze, not pleading, not demanding, simply waiting. I see you, she murmured, voice shaking. I see what they forgot. She moved to him, crouched low again, gently cupping the side of his face. Blood streaked his muzzle, but his eyes were calm, steady. No longer the ghost chained by vengeance, but the shepherd he once was. The wind whipped up behind them again, a rising chorus of nature in revolt. But here, in this pocket of stillness between predator and protector, something unspoken was made clear. Orin was no longer alone, not in instinct, not in purpose, not in the eyes of the wild. The shotgun came first. Its metallic glint cut through the swirling haze like a verdict delivered by stormlight. Then Marshal Lynn stepped into view, hat blown off, coat whipping like a banner of judgment. His boots crunched over sand and shattered fence line as he marched toward the tableau frozen in time. 3 tigeresses crouched but calm, an alpha watching from distance and in the center. Orin no longer chained. His blood-specked muzzle lifted as he met Marshall's approach. You move, you lose, Marshall growled to no one in particular, eyes locked on Orin, jaw set with a fury only grief could calcify. Behind him, Miguel panted from the run, eyes wide. Sir, wait, shut it! The shotgun was raised. He lunges, he dies. Lyra moved instinctively, stepping in front of Orin. Don't! He's not attacking. Look at him, Marshal. Look, he's not the threat. You don't get it, Doc. Marshall's voice shook, not from fear, but something worse. History. That dog left my son under 3 tons of concrete. Don't tell me about threats. He never left him. Ava's voice cracked through the air like a bell in mourning. Marshall's head turned. His ex-wife stood 10 feet back, hair tousled by the storm, eyes wet, but steady. You weren't there, he hissed. No, Ava replied, stepping forward. But I read the mission logs. I saw the body cams. Orin stayed by Nathan until the second they pulled him out. Until the second his own ribs started to cave. He didn't leave your son. He couldn't. Marshall faltered, just a flicker. The barrel wavered, then steadied. I said back away. Lyra didn't move. If you're going to shoot him, you'll have to shoot through me. Don't tempt me, Marshall muttered, but his voice was thin now, hollow. And then Orin moved, not to attack, not to run. He stepped forward between Lyra and the gun. Slowly, quietly, his posture low, protective, not aggressive, just present. His eyes locked onto Marshall's, no growl, no snarl, only the silent defiance of a soldier who understood exactly what was happening and chose to shield, not escape. Get back! Marshall shouted, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Orin held. Ava stepped closer, voice breaking now. He's doing what he's always done. He's guarding, even after everything. The wind kicked up dust between them like the past rising to challenge the present. And still, Orin did not move. Lyra placed a hand on his back, feeling the tension in every muscle. He doesn't run from duty. You think he doesn't feel loss? He carries it deeper than any of us. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Marshall whispered, Why? His voice cracked. To protect someone else, Ava said. Because that's all he knows. The barrel of the shotgun trembled, lowered. Not all the way, but enough. Orin's tail didn't wag, his body didn't relax, but he stayed still. Alive. Unflinching. In that standoff, the truth was louder than any bark. The dog they tried to punish was the only one still protecting. The silence after a near shooting feels like the eye of a hurricane, deafening in its restraint. Dust curled around their legs. Orin still stood firm between Lyra and the shotgun, his breath ragged but steady, as if guarding was the only commandment he remembered. Then, crackle. The radio on Miguel's hip screamed to life. Static, then panic. "This is Northgate visual on 3 Tigers, moving fast. They're breaching the ridge, headed south. I repeat, headed toward the highway." A beat of horror passed through them. Lyra spun toward Marcus, who'd just arrived in a battered jeep. "The highway?" "It's tourist traffic this hour," he said grimly. "Families. RVs." Marshall's fingers tightened around the shotgun, then slowly loosened. His face twisted between rage and reason. For a moment, he looked like a man drowning in a choice he never expected to make. And in that heartbeat, Orin barked. Just once. But it was sharp, commanding. Like something ancient inside him had reawakened. He turned, staggered, then ran, not away, toward the storm, toward the ridge, toward the danger. "Wait!" Lyra shouted instinctively, but he didn't pause. Only glanced back once, long enough for her to see something in his eyes. Not fear, not defiance. Purpose. "Don't just stand there." Ava turned to Marshall, her voice rising above the wind. "Let him go." "He's dehydrated," Marcus said, "and that leg's torn bad." "I know," Lyra whispered, "but he still remembers what it means to save a life." Marshall looked from Ava to the horizon, where Orin had already disappeared into the swirling dust. His lips pressed into a grim line. "If he dies out there," he began, but Ava cut him off. "If you don't let him try, it won't just be the dog who failed." Something in that sentence cracked the last shield inside him. Marshall finally exhaled a long, broken sound. Then, "The vet goes too." Lyra blinked. "Me? He listens to you. You're the only damn person he trusts." She didn't hesitate. "Give me a dart rifle and the keys." Miguel tossed her the tranquilizer. Marcus pointed to the jeep. Then Marshall, for the first time, looked at her. Not as an employee, not as an outsider, but as something dangerously close to hope. "You bring him back." "I'll follow him," she said. "That's all I need to do." As the jeep roared to life, Lyra drove straight into the wall of sand, windshield wipers screeching against grain and grit. Behind her, the sanctuary trembled. Tigers loose, storm at full gale, staff in chaos. And in front of her, a single set of paw prints being etched, second by second, into the dust, fresh, determined. Orin was tracking. He had chosen the mission. And Lyra, she had chosen him. The storm swallowed the road within minutes. Sand blasted the windshield in relentless waves, 1,000 invisible needles pricking at the glass as Lyra hunched over the wheel. The headlights barely cut through the thick ochre cloud swirling ahead. Somewhere out there, not far, was a dog with more determination than most men she'd ever known. And he was running straight into the fire. She slowed the jeep and opened the door into the howling wind. The tranquilizer rifle slung over her back rattled against her shoulder. Grit filled her boots as she stepped down. "Orin!" she shouted into the void, though she knew he wouldn't bark back. He wouldn't break formation, wouldn't break focus. She scanned the ground. Paw prints, faint, but precise, deep. moving northeast toward the hills. Lyra adjusted her scarf over her mouth, pulled her goggles tighter, and began to follow. Each step forward was a choice against comfort, against fear, against the primal instinct to stay sheltered. But she wasn't here to be safe. She was here to witness, to walk beside the one creature who still believed he had a job to do. For a moment the wind dipped, just enough to see him. A silhouette in the chaos low to the ground, shoulders tight, ears pinned back. A blur of motion, moving with exactitude. This wasn't the gait of a stray. It was the posture of a scout. Each pivot, each pause was a decision, a calculation. He sniffed the air, crouched low, then moved again, silent, spectral. Lyra whispered, "You're not just surviving. You're still working." There was something sacred in that, the way his training hadn't faded even after chains, starvation, and grief. Something about him hadn't died with Nathan. Purpose. It still lived inside his bones. They crested a hill and stopped. Below, a flicker of movement, too fast, too big. Tigers. Lyra dropped to her knees beside a mesquite bush and raised her binoculars. Through the dust and distortion she counted. 2 young ones. Racing wild, confused, not hunting fleeing. One stumbled, spooked by its own shadow, and clawed at the loose sand. The other paused, nostrils flaring, searching for a way back. Orin didn't bark. He didn't charge. He waited, calculated. Then, as if on cue, he trotted down the slope, moving in a wide arc, not toward them, but around. Flanking, herding. It wasn't aggression. It was choreography. Lyra felt a tremor pass through her ribs. "You're doing what you were born for." The wind kicked up again, violent, whirling. She had to move quickly. No time to second-guess. Rifle ready, Lyra followed Orin down the incline. Every few feet he looked back, not for help, but for confirmation that she was still with him. And she was. With every step, her doubt unraveled. She wasn't here to tame him. She wasn't here to save him. She was here to bear witness to a creature that had already saved more lives than anyone cared to count and was trying to save more. Even now, even broken, even bleeding. Because duty when real never ends with the last mission. By the time they reached the base of the hill, Orin had guided the younger tiger back toward a bend in the canyon where Marcus had set up temporary holding nets during previous emergencies. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a start. Lyra positioned herself on a ridge above. Orin lay down low in the dust, panting but not giving in. One of the tigers crept forward, recognizing the path, and Orin, with nothing but instinct and breath left, stood again. No bark this time, just a look, a silent command, and the tiger obeyed. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered: broken branches, sand-caked roads, and silence so taut it rang like a held breath. Lyra slammed the jeep door shut and stepped onto the highway, boots crunching against scattered glass and debris. Red Echo's main road stretched out in front of her like a half-finished memory, shimmering in the desert heat, veiled in dust. But that wasn't what made her chest tighten. It was the tiger, standing still, too still. A young male, no more than 2 years old, loomed near the shoulder of the road, just 20 feet from a line of stalled vehicles, their terrified occupants crouched inside. Flashing lights from 2 sheriff's cruisers painted stripes of red and blue across his white coat, like war paint. One step, two. The tiger's ears twitched. Somewhere, a mother inside a van held her child close, and behind her, a deputy raised his rifle. "Don't!" Lyra started, voice cracking. Too late. The rifle clicked into place. Orin appeared like smoke, out of the sagebrush between ruined signage and the shadow of a tilted highway pole. The German shepherd emerged, not running, not charging, approaching with purpose. He moved slowly, diagonally, cutting into the tiger's peripheral, his body low, tail neutral, not aggressive, not submissive, controlled. The tiger turned its head. Their eyes met. Simba. Lyra had heard the name once, murmured by Marcus during feeding rounds. He was the youngest of the Bengal siblings, timid, gentle, the runt who never learned to roar properly. And now here he was, lost in the world of asphalt and exhaust, standing inches from death. Orin stopped 10 feet away. Then he barked, short, sharp, rhythmic. Once, pause, then again, higher pitch. The same pattern Lara had seen in the footage from Orin's service years, used to guide earthquake survivors, children hidden beneath rubble, wounded comrades disoriented in smoke. It wasn't noise, it was language. The tiger blinked, his paws shuffled in the dirt, muscles no longer coiled to spring but to listen. Another bark, lower, 2 beats. Simba lowered his head. The gun still hovered. Lyra raised her arms, standing between the police and the animals. "Wait!" she whispered. "He's got him." The next seconds felt like a lifetime carved from sand. Orin barked again, softer this time, almost like a question. Simba let out a low huff, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. And then he moved. Toward Orin. One slow step, then another, like a student relearning steps from a forgotten dance. Orin turned, took 5 paces back toward the desert, stopped, looked over his shoulder. Simba followed, voluntarily. No darts, no ropes, no panic, just trust. Born from the kind of communication that bypassed species that lived somewhere deeper. The rifles lowered. The deputies watched in open-mouthed awe as predator followed protector into the dust-streaked light of mid-morning. One of them whispered, "What the hell kind of dog is that?" Lyra answered without looking away, "The kind that remembers who he is." As Orin and Simba disappeared down the embankment, the silence left behind was not empty. It was reverent. The kind of silence born when something impossible just happened, and everyone knows they'll never forget the moment. Even the wind stood still. The sanctuary had grown quieter, not safer, but quieter. Lyra parked beside the closed gate of the visitor center, its large glass facade catching the evening light like a watchful eye. The wind had finally died down, leaving behind a landscape dusted with storm residue, pebbles, paw prints, silence. And there they were, 2 shapes, still as statues, majestic and waiting. The tigeresses. They didn't growl, didn't pace. They simply sat, side by side, on the concrete path just outside the center's main entrance, one paw crossed over the other, as if they belonged there, as if they had chosen it. Lyra stepped out, blinking against the haze. Miguel was already near the doorway, barely daring to breathe. "They've been here 30 minutes, he whispered. "Didn't break anything, didn't even scratch the glass." Lyra took a step closer, heart thudding, boots crunching the grit beneath her. One of them was smaller, a bit younger, golden coat darker near the ears. But the other, larger, scars on her left flank. Old eyes amber flecked with age and memory. There was no mistaking her. Suri, the matriarch. The first tiger to arrive at Red Echo. The one Marshall used to call Queen. She hadn't let anyone near her in over a year, not even Marcus. Yet here she was, not fleeing, not attacking, just sitting, staring through the glass as though expecting someone. Orin emerged from behind the truck. He limped, slightly tired from the storm, from the rescue. But something in his posture had changed. The war dog tension had eased, replaced by something quieter, something deeper. Lyra opened the side gate. Orin trotted forward without command, straight toward the glass doors. Miguel flinched. "Should we close the shutters?" "No," Lyra whispered. "Watch." Orin stopped a foot away from the entrance. Suri stood. The younger tigress mirrored her. There was a moment, no longer than a breath, where time seemed to catch on the edge of meaning. And then she moved. Suri leaned in, slowly, pressing the bridge of her nose against the glass. Orin matched her. No bark, no growl, no movement. Just touch through the glass. Two creatures of different species, two souls burned by loss, two warriors who had survived men, storms, and misunderstanding, nose to nose. Lyra's eyes welled up before she knew why. It wasn't just the gesture, it was what she saw in Orin's eyes, something long buried, flickering back to life. Recognition, belonging, not to humans, not to cages, but to this moment. Miguel exhaled beside her. "They're not coming in." "They're not trying to escape," Lyra murmured. "They're waiting." "For what?" Orin turned away from the glass then, as if answering, and Suri didn't protest. She sat back down. The younger tiger followed, still, silent, guarding a door not as prisoners but as sentinels. Inside the visitor center, behind the empty ticket counter and silent exhibit screens, the shadows stretched long. Lyra rested a hand on the glass. "I think they're telling us something," she said quietly. Miguel nodded. "What?" "That maybe we're not the only ones who lost people here." Orin walked back to her side, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He didn't look at the tigers again. He didn't need to, because some bonds don't need leashes, or names, or language. They just exist. Dawn didn't rise so much as emerge, gently, like a truce between night and light. The sanctuary lay in a hush. No engines, no human voices, only the quiet wind brushing against chain-link fences and rustling the sparse trees that hadn't yet learned they were part of the desert. And in the stillness, something unthinkable happened. A German shepherd walked ahead of two tigeresses. No leash, no command, just silent understanding. The gravel crunched under Orin's paws as he took the lead ears alert, tail held low in calm control. Behind him, Suri walked like a queen who had once ruled with fear but now chose grace. Beside her, the younger tigress mirrored every move, watching Orin with a reverence more felt than seen. They moved as one. Past the visitor center, past the broken signage scorched by the sandstorm, past the emergency lights still blinking faintly from last night's chaos. Lyra stood near the eastern staff gate, Miguel at her side. Marcus had just arrived, shirt unbuttoned, boots half-laced. And Marshal Lynn was already there, catchpole in hand, shotgun slung, but untouched. He had come to control. Instead, he watched. Orin paused. The gate to the tiger enclosure stood 20 feet ahead. A metal threshold he once avoided now walked toward freely. Suri stopped too, for a breath, for a decision. Then Orin turned his head, just slightly. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Suri stepped forward. The younger one followed. Together, they walked through the open gate as if they had never been caged, as if it was their idea all along. No panic, no resistance, just a quiet return. The entire staff stood frozen. Janine from admin had tears in her eyes. Bobby, the handler who once called Orin a liability, dropped the tranquilizer gun to his side and whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." Even the birds in the reserve seemed to fall still, as if bearing witness. Lyra blinked slowly, heart in her throat. Because this wasn't obedience. This was respect. Earned, lived, returned. And Marshall? He lowered the catchpole to the ground like it weighed more than he could carry. His voice was raw when he spoke, barely audible, but it carried. "Good job, soldier." Orin didn't turn. He just stood at the gate, watching the tigeresses melt into the shade of their pen. Suri glanced back, once eyes catching Lyra's across the distance. Then she vanished behind the enclosure wall. The gate clicked shut. Miguel engaged the lock. But somehow, it no longer felt like a prison. It felt safe, because the animals hadn't been forced back. They'd been led by a dog who once knew war, betrayal, and loss, and now chose peace. Lyra knelt beside Orin. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Instead, she placed a hand gently on his chest, feeling the slow, steady thump beneath fur matted with dust and dried blood. And in that rhythm, she heard it. Not just survival, leadership, not over them, but among them. "Alpha," Miguel muttered. Lyra nodded, still watching Orin. "No," she whispered. "Something older. Because some dogs aren't just trained. Some are called." The moment Orin staggered, Lyra felt it, like the sound of something too proud to whimper collapsing beneath itself. He didn't yelp, didn't whine, just dropped. Front legs gave out first, slow and reluctant, like stone surrendering to time. Then the rest of him followed, body folding sideways in the sand, breath rattling as if the air was suddenly too thick to breathe. "Orin!" Lyra's voice cracked as she ran. The sanctuary blurred around her. The red desert faded. The fences, the faces, the sky. Nothing existed but the limp shape in the dirt and the seconds ticking too loud inside her chest. She dropped to her knees beside him. His tongue lolled, dry, gums pale, pulse faint beneath fur that radiated heat like a dying star. Dehydration. Collapse. Overexertion. He had pushed too far for too long, and no one had stopped him, not even her. "Get the med kit!" she shouted. But no one moved, not until Marshall stepped forward. He didn't speak, just scooped Orin's body into his arms like a soldier retrieving a fallen comrade. The way his hands shook at the elbows betrayed the weight wasn't just physical. No one expected him to help, least of all Lyra. Inside the makeshift clinic, fluorescent lights hummed. A cooler of saline was already waiting. Lyra tore open the packet, slid the needle in. Orin's flank didn't flinch. Too far gone for pain, too silent for protest. Her hands trembled but stayed precise. Marshall stood in the doorway like a shadow trying not to exist. "Will he survive?" he asked. The question landed like a brick-bare, broken, human. Lyra looked up, her eyes meeting his. "If you let me try." A long silence stretched between them, one filled with things never said, blame, regret, punishment handed out like penance for a death no one could undo. Finally, Marshall gave a single nod. "Do it." That was all the permission she needed. Lyra snapped into motion. Oxygen mask, IV line, cooling compress. She shaved a patch of fur behind his ear to check capillary refill, whispered constantly to keep him tethered. "Come on, Orin. Don't go dark on me now." His tail twitched once. A tremor, a memory of fight. Outside, the sanctuary murmured with aftermath. The storm had passed. The tigers were back in their enclosure. But inside the clinic, time held its breath, suspended between what had been and what might never be again. Marcus entered quietly with more gauze and blankets. "Still holding on?" he asked. Lyra didn't look up. "He better be." In the corner, Marshall lowered himself into a chair. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a father at a bedside, a commander without a unit, a man watching the last living thread to his son fray before his eyes. And still, Orin lay silent, but not lifeless, because beneath the shallow rise of his chest there was something still beating, still trying, still choosing to stay. The clinic had settled into that brittle quiet that only comes after chaos, a quiet too still to trust, too loud to ignore. Orin lay wrapped in soft towels, hooked to fluids, his breath shallow but steadier than before. Lyra sat at his side, fingers absently stroking behind his ear, watching the slow rhythm of his chest. She didn't hear Ava come in, just felt the shift of air and emotion, like someone opening a memory instead of a door. Ava moved slowly, deliberately, as if each step was stitched with ghosts. In her hands was a worn olive-drab pouch frayed at the edges, darkened with age and sweat and desert. "I found this," she said quietly, holding it out. Lyra turned. Inside, nestled in cloth, was a knife. Not ceremonial, not decorative, just honest. The kind soldiers carried because they had to, because sometimes survival wasn't metaphor. The blade was dull in places, the handle worn smooth, where fingers had gripped it 1,000 times. But it had been cleaned recently. "He always kept it close," Ava said, her voice somewhere between breath and tremble. Said it reminded him there were things you protect without question. That sometimes a tool isn't just a weapon, it's a promise. Lyra swallowed. This is Nathan's?" Ava nodded. Her fingers lingered on the hilt a second longer before letting go. "I gave it to him when he deployed, and now I'm giving it to you, because he would have wanted you to have it, to help Orin." Lyra looked down at the blade. The edge caught the clinic light, refracting not just steel but memory. She pressed her palm around the handle, and it felt weighted, personal, like a handshake across time. "You're sure?" she asked. "No," Ava said gently, "but I'm doing it anyway." They sat in silence a while, just the two women and the dog neither of them could stop believing in. Then Ava reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thin, folded bundle of paper. The creases were soft, well-worn. She handled them the way one might handle a photograph from a better life. "I never showed these to Marshall," Ava said. "He wasn't ready." But maybe now. She unfolded the top letter, eyes gliding across the handwriting like touching a ghost. "This one," she whispered, then began to read aloud. April 3rd, 2016. We're still digging through the rubble in Aleppo. There's this sound Orin makes when he finds something. It's not quite a bark. It's like a code. Like he's telling me, I got you. He doesn't quit. Doesn't sleep unless I do. Yesterday I tripped over broken rebar and cut my arm. Didn't even feel it. But Orin stopped. Licked it once. Looked at me until I patched it. Like he was saying, you're not allowed to fall apart yet. He's not a dog. He's my brother. If I don't make it home, take care of him. Please. For me. Ava's voice cracked on the last word. Lyra's hand stilled over Orin's back. The room felt holy, not in the religious sense, but sacred in grief, sacred in love. He kept every letter, Ava said, her voice thick with memory. But this one he never mailed. I only found it a month after his death, folded in the back of a book on trauma dogs. He'd written it but never sent it. I think some part of him knew. She blinked, brushing a thumb along Orin's muzzle. He'd be proud of you, she whispered to the dog. Orin didn't open his eyes, but his ear twitched, a slow, almost imperceptible movement, alive, still listening, still choosing to stay. Outside the wind had eased, but the world remained different, changed. Something had shifted, not just in the sky or the earth, but between these people, this dog, and the truths they'd buried. Lyra looked again at the knife resting on the metal tray. A blade that once protected a soldier, now saving what was left of him. The wind had died, but Red Echo hadn't yet returned to stillness. Inside the visitor center's common room, converted temporarily into a shelter for displaced staff and anxious animals, Ava found Marshall seated alone by the photo wall. The images behind him told stories of better years. Tiger cubs pawing at water troughs, children laughing on guided tours, Nathan standing tall in his K9 uniform with Orin at his heel. But tonight, none of that laughter echoed. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the generator and the distant breath of a tiger somewhere beyond the fences. Marshall didn't look up when Ava entered. I thought I told you not to come back here, he said softly. You did, she answered, folding her coat and setting it over a chair. But Orin was dying. And so were you. He exhaled a sharp breath, not quite a scoff-more like a deflation. You think I don't know that? A pause. She stepped forward, voice lower now. I read the letter. Marshall's shoulders tensed. I found it in the book, she continued. The one you kept in the desk drawer you thought I'd never open. You never blamed Orin, Marshall. So why punish him? His reply came slower than she expected, like something being chipped from stone. Because it was easier, he murmured. Blaming him out loud was easier than admitting I couldn't save what was left of Nathan. He looked up at her, then eyes hollow, voice frayed. You don't get it, Ava. After Nathan, after the flag, after the funeral, there was nothing left. No voice, no presence, no damn future, just Orin. Just this dog walking around with my son's smell on his fur, and that haunted look like he knew it too. He clenched his fists, and every time I saw him, I saw what I lost. Ava's voice softened. But he was the last piece of Nathan that still fought. Marshall didn't speak for a long while. Then, in a rare moment of rawness, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was weathered, corners curled. Nathan knelt in desert gear, arm slung over Orin's shoulders like a sibling, both faces alert and smiling. Real smiles, not posed, not military. "They were never apart," Marshall whispered. "I know," Ava replied, her voice trembling. "That's why I brought Orin here. I thought maybe this place could be a kind of peace for him, and maybe for us too." Marshall blinked back something unspoken. "Peace doesn't live here anymore." "Maybe not yet," Ava said, "but it's circling back." Before more could be said, a sudden buzz cracked through the intercom on the desk. Lyra's voice tight with urgency. "Marcus just got a call. The Animal Welfare Board. They're sending 2 trucks, ETA 40 minutes. Marshall stood, voice shifting brisk, practical, but layered with something new beneath it. "They're coming for Orin. And the tigers, and maybe the sanctuary." He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the photo in his hand. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Then we better be ready." The trucks came just after sunrise, 2 white government-issued pickups with state plates and the bold insignia of the Animal Welfare Board printed on the doors. Their arrival stirred the sanctuary like a tremor. Dust rose behind their tires, clipboards and cameras emerged before greetings, and standing at the front gate, waiting in silence, was Marshall Lynn. He didn't flinch when they stepped out, didn't hide behind bureaucracy, just nodded once and opened the gate himself. "This way," he said simply. They convened in the conference trailer, the one usually reserved for private donors and compliance reviews. Today it smelled of dust, worry, and old coffee. Everyone sat in folding chairs except Orin, who lay near Lyra's feet, bandaged, weak, but alert. 2 inspectors led the proceedings. Ms. Rowan, a sharp-eyed official in her 50s with a worn leather notebook, and Agent Malik, whose silence was more imposing than his words. "Let's begin," Ms. Rowan said crisply, eyes landing on Lyra first. "Dr. Quinn, your report?" Lyra stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I've only been at Red Echo a short time," she began. "But in that time, I witnessed deliberate neglect of a former police K-9 named Orin, chained without shelter, water withheld as punishment, denied medical attention. His condition was critical when I reached him during the storm." Ms. Rowan's pen scratched furiously. "Do you believe this was accidental or intentional mistreatment?" Lyra looked at Marshall, then back at the board. "Intentional," she said, "and personal." A murmur swept the room. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ava lowered her gaze. Orin didn't move, but his ears twitched, as if hearing things words couldn't carry. Then, without being prompted, Marshall stood. The inspectors turned toward him with polite skepticism, but his voice surprised them all. "It's true," he said. Silence. "I did it," he continued. "I left him there by the fence. I refused care. Not out of ignorance. Not because I didn't know what he needed, but because I was angry. At him, at everything. I treated him like a ghost I couldn't bury." Rowan blinked, her pen hesitating mid-word. "I was wrong," Marshall said, "and I won't defend it." He took a deep breath, steadied himself, then looked directly at Ava. "That's why I'm stepping down. Today." Ava's brows lifted. Marshall turned to the inspectors. "She's not just my ex-wife. She's a co-founder. She always should have been. She and Dr. Quinn are forming a nonprofit taking over Red Echo under oversight. I'll transfer full ownership." Rowan tapped her pen once against her folder. "You understand this doesn't erase liability." "I'm not asking it to," he said. I'm just trying to finally do right." A pause. Then Ava stood beside him. "Red Echo was never meant to be a cage," she said. "It was meant to be a haven. For animals, yes, but also for those of us too broken to admit we needed healing too." She looked down at Orin, who now met her eyes, quiet, steady. "We're ready to build that haven again." Rowan nodded. "There will be hearings, reviews, conditions, but this is a start." She turned to Orin. "That dog should have been dead," she murmured. "Instead, he saved this place." Lyra crouched beside Orin, whispering something only he could hear. His tail thumped once, just once, but it was enough. Late afternoon bled into Red Echo with a hush that felt earned. The dust had settled. The inspectors had packed their files and driven off, promising oversight, but allowing one last breath before judgment would return. Inside the security office, a single monitor flickered in grainy green and white. Marcus hunched forward, his glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose, one weathered finger dragging the playback bar. Then he stopped. Frame by frame, he reversed, played again and again, until he was sure. Lyra heard the knock at her clinic door and opened it to find Marcus holding a thumb drive. "You need to see this." They slipped inside the small back room, where she kept her files and what remained of Orin's first collar. The monitor came to life with the footage, and Lyra squinted at the time stamp. 1843, 6 minutes before the Tiger Gate was found open. The wind hadn't yet peaked. The dust wasn't full. In the frame, a hooded figure, moving toward the side enclosure. Swift, deliberate, gloved. But as the wind pressed the hood back, the face was unmistakable. Ava Lynn. Lyra stared, mouth dry. "She opened it." Marcus nodded, solemn, without hesitation. He didn't offer explanations, just left the drive on the table and walked out. Lyra found Ava sitting alone on the east bench, where Nathan used to read to the younger keepers. The wind stirred the hem of her coat. The tigeresses had been herded back earlier, but one Surrey lay nearby in the distance, eyes half closed, as if listening to something beyond. Lyra sat beside her, quiet at first. "I saw the footage." Ava didn't blink. "I figured you would." "Why?" Ava exhaled slowly. The words caught somewhere between regret and resolve. "Because I knew Marshall wouldn't stop. Not until someone or something forced him to. I watched what he did to Orin. I watched what he became." She paused, then continued, eyes fixed on the horizon. "And I knew. If the storm didn't break the fences, I had to." Lyra turned toward her. "You risked lives." "I did," Ava said, "and I'll answer for it." She turned now, meeting Lyra's gaze, steady, unflinching. "But here's what no one expected. The tigers didn't run wild. They didn't maul. They didn't attack Orin. They protected him. They gathered around him like he was one of them, like he was chosen." Lyra's voice softened. "Why do you think that happened?" Ava looked away, eyes distant but shining. "Because he never turned savage, not even after being treated like one. He carried Nathan's heart, and somewhere in all that pain, he remembered who he was meant to be." She pressed a hand gently to her chest. "So I gambled, not on chaos, but on instinct, on something deeper than fear." Silence stretched between them, until Lyra asked quietly, "Will you tell Marshall?" "I already have," Ava replied. And I told the board. Lyra looked stunned. You could lose everything. Ava smiled, faint but genuine. I already did, but this time I lost it trying to protect something worth saving. In the distance, Orin lay beneath a tree, watchful, healing, whole. For the first time in years, not just surviving, but belonging. The boardroom at Red Echo hadn't been used in months. It still smelled faintly of sun-scorched plywood and antiseptic. The long table was dusty. The overhead fan clicked with every slow rotation, like it was tired of pretending to move air that no one wanted to breathe. Director Carmen Simmons sat at the head of the table, crisp blazer wrinkled at the elbows, her notepad filled with crossed-out phrases. Facility shut down. Endangerment. Emergency relocation. She had seen enough failed sanctuaries to know how these things ended. Across from her sat Marshal Lynn, spine straight, but hands wringing each other beneath the table. He'd said everything he needed to say. Ava had spoken too. Lyra sat near the far end, silent but present. Marcus stood in the corner, arms crossed like a quiet sentinel. Then soft footsteps, claws on tile. A hush fell. Everyone turned. The door had been left ajar. And through it, Orin entered. Not with fanfare, not with barking or tail-wagging or fear, but with the steady, weightless grace of someone who had already survived the worst thing a heart could carry. The German shepherd walked slowly past chairs and clutter, past silence and memory, until he stood directly in front of Marshal Lynn, and waited. Marshal didn't move at first. His breath held. Then, tentatively, he extended his hand, palm open. Orin sniffed it once, then leaned forward, and licked it just once right across the knuckles. A sound escaped Marshal's throat. Not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. Just a human thing breaking open. He lowered his head and whispered, I'm sorry. Orin stepped back, gave one soft exhale through his nose, then settled beside Marshal's feet head on his paws. Calm, unburdened, as if to say, it's over. We're still here. We begin again. Director Simmons slowly put her pen down. She looked at Orin, then at Marshal, then back at the notes she'd been writing so angrily just an hour earlier. A long silence. Then finally, I came here expecting to shut this place down. No one interrupted. But I've never seen a rescue animal de-escalate a federal hearing. A few stifled exhales, almost laughter, almost relief. Simmons straightened. Here's what we'll do. She flipped to a clean page. A full compliance review, a nonprofit transition, weekly inspections for 3 months, full ownership transfer by quarter's end. She looked to Ava. You'll chair the board. Then to Lyra. You'll be medical director. And lastly to Marshal. You will not hold leadership, but you'll stay, if they let you. Everyone turned to Orin. He blinked once, then closed his eyes and exhaled. It was the closest thing to a vote the desert had ever known. The sun rose slowly over Red Echo. This time it wasn't watched from behind barbed wire or security towers. It rose over shoulders that were weary but unburdened, over bruised trust beginning to mend, over fences still standing not to confine, but to protect. On the front gate a new sign had gone up. White background, red lettering, simple. Red Echo Wildlife Sanctuary, a community nonprofit trust. It didn't shout. It didn't claim anything heroic. It simply existed, like Orin, like survival. Inside the administrative cabin, Lyra stood by the whiteboard. a fresh clipboard in hand, her khaki shirt now embroidered with a new badge. Medical director. She didn't smile for glory. She smiled because the animals would be okay. "And you're sure you want this role?" Director Simmons asked, stacking the last of the transition papers into a canvas folder. "Yes," Lyra replied without hesitation. "But only if Bobby gets the one he deserves." At the back of the room, Bobby, formerly just groundskeeper, guy with keys, quiet eyes who noticed everything, tilted his head. "Me?" Simmons chuckled. "You're the only one the cats actually listen to." "Senior Animal Advisor," Lyra said, gently nudging the title card toward him. Bobby stared at it, then gave a small, awkward shrug. "Guess I'll need a name badge." Across the field, Marshall and Ava stood by the enclosure rail, silent. The tigers were awake, but calm, especially Suri, who moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen human rage and chosen not to mirror it. Orin lay in the shade of a nearby platform, paws crossed, his side still bandaged but healing. He watched them, not judging, just witnessing. Ava broke the silence. "We could have walked away." Marshall nodded. "And we would have stayed broken." They turned as Simmons approached, clipboard in hand. "Here are your terms," she said. "Community service, 6 months minimum, no executive input, no financial authority, no voting power." Ava nodded. "And?" "And you'll remain on site, as volunteers." Marshall looked surprised. "You're letting us stay?" "Not for your sake," Simmons said. "For theirs." She glanced toward the animals. "And for his." Orin blinked slowly, resting his chin on his paws. Later that afternoon, while painting over the old private sign, Marcus grunted, "Feels weird, huh?" "Feels earned," Bobby replied, rolling on a second coat of paint. "Finally." Lyra stepped outside, holding the newest logbook. She watched Orin approach the fence line where 2 cubs now played. He didn't bark, didn't command. He just sat, tail flicking, gently observing, letting them be. A new chapter hadn't started with a celebration. It started with a clipboard, a nameplate, a lick across the hand, and the quiet vow, "This time, we protect better." At first, they thought it was a coincidence. The great matriarch, Suri, walking the same path each morning, same time, same route, same destination. The northern fence line behind the veterinary quarters, where Orin now slept in a shaded open-air pen with no chains, no padlocks, only soft earth, clean water, and space to rest his worn bones. Each day she came. Each day he was there. Not a sound between them. Not a snarl, not a bark. Just eyes, watching, knowing. On the 3rd morning, Bobby stood beside Lyra with a mug of stale coffee, scratching the back of his neck. "That's the 6th day in a row," Lyra said, shielding her eyes from the sun. "She doesn't come to eat," Bobby murmured. "Doesn't pace, doesn't challenge the gate." "What's she doing then?" He took a sip, the steam curling around his weather-worn face. "Waiting." Orin didn't move when Suri approached. He never did. He didn't rise, didn't retreat, just lifted his head slowly, watching as the tigress lowered herself onto the warm sand, only feet away, divided by reinforced mesh, yet closer than most humans ever got. For minutes that felt longer than silence itself, they held each other's gaze. Not like predator and prey, not like soldier and beast, like something else. Like old souls with matching scars. "Some bonds," Bobby said, leaning forward, "are older than instinct." Lyra glanced sideways. You believe in that?" He smiled, just barely. "I do now." Later that afternoon, Lyra opened Orin's logbook. She'd documented physical progress, behavioral shifts, weight gain, but for the first time she added something different. A short entry, just 3 words. "He's not alone." That night, under a deep desert moon, the wind stirred sand across the floor of Orin's den. He lifted his head once, ears twitching, then looked toward the fence. Suri was already there, silent, still, sovereign. A quiet queen and a scarred sentinel. They stayed like that until dawn, 2 guardians of a place that had once failed them both, now watching to make sure it never would again. The wind had changed, not just in direction, but in feel. No longer dry and biting, but full of scent, earth, fur, morning dew clinging to cactus flowers. Lyra stood outside the old staff cabin at the eastern ridge, once used only for weekend shifts, now cleared, dusted, and waiting. Orin sat beside her, unchained, alert, yet calm. His muzzle bore the silver threads of healing. His breath, though slow, was steady. She looked down at him. "Ready for your new mission?" she whispered. His ears twitched. Then his tail, just once, thumped the dusty ground. A yes, without words. They had walked this path every morning since the dust storm broke. The same trail that once carried fear and failure. Now it led to something gentler. Not escape, not exile, but permanence. The sanctuary wasn't perfect. There were still fences, still scars, still legal hearings to finish and buildings to repair. But there was also trust, real trust. And it started here. Ava waited at the steps, holding a tin of lemon balm tea and an old brass key. She smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that curved with memory. "I never planned to stay," she said softly, placing the key into Lyra's hand. "But maybe this place never needed me. Maybe it was just waiting for you." Lyra held the key like something fragile. "I don't know if I can do what Nathan dreamed." "You don't have to," Ava replied, eyes misty but clear. "Just keep what he loved alive, that's more than enough." Inside, the cabin was bare but sunlit. 1 bed, 1 desk, 1 framed sketch of the sanctuary when it first opened, before the politics, before the permits, before grief turned men into ghosts. Orin padded across the room, nose low to the floor, then stopped near the open doorway. No commands, no hesitation. He simply lay down, facing out, guarding what was his. That night, Lyra unpacked a box of books and found Nathan's field journal tucked inside. On the inside cover, in his handwriting, "We don't build sanctuaries with fences. We build them with love and the courage to stay." She didn't cry, not yet, but she did kneel beside Orin, her palm resting on his shoulder. "Then let's stay," she murmured. "Together." And he closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in peace. Because this time, he wasn't being stationed. He wasn't being caged. He wasn't being punished. This time, Orin was being chosen. It began with shaky cell phone footage, a streak of dust, a flash of brindled fur, then tigers, 3 of them walking in a calm procession behind a battered German shepherd. No muzzle, no leash, just trust. By morning, it was everywhere. Television anchors stumbled over their own awe. Former police canine leads escaped tigers back to safety in desert sanctuary. From punishment to protector. This is Orin's story. Hero dog or something more? It wasn't a headline. It was a reckoning. Clips played on hospital TVs in Ohio and army bases in Guam. In a retirement home in Topeka, a veteran blinked slowly, whispering to no one, "That dog knows." By the time CNN cut to a panel of animal behaviorists, a petition had already gathered 2.7 million signatures. One anchor read a quote from a retired SARE officer aloud. "We taught dogs to trust us. Then one day, one of them reminded us how." At Red Echo, the calls poured in like a flood. The Department of Defense asked for a behavioral profile. 2 rescue teams from Chile and Iceland requested Orin's scent pattern data. A university in Tokyo offered to fund a joint research paper titled Interspecies Empathy Beyond Instinct. But Lara refused to turn him into a specimen. She stood at the press conference in a faded blue shirt, wind still catching her hair, and spoke without script. "He's not a miracle," she said. "He's a partner. And he didn't do what he did because we trained it into him. He did it because someone believed in him, even when others called him broken. You want to honor him? Then stop calling him special. Start calling him seen." That clip was the one that broke the algorithm. Within hours, nonprofits changed their banners to show Orin's silhouette beside the words, "Dignity for Working Dogs." A foundation was quietly named after him, the Orin Protocol, dedicated to safe retirement care for all K9 units. Even Marcus, who never touched social media, stared at his phone in disbelief. "Well, damn," he muttered. "Guess the old boy's gone global." Inside the clinic, Orin ignored the noise. He lay sprawled in the shade, muzzle twitching in sleep, legs flinching with remembered sprints. Lyra knelt beside him with a soft chuckle. "Global icon, huh?" He opened one eye, licked her hand once, then went back to dreaming. The trail to the ridge hadn't changed. Same cracked stones. Same twisted mesquite trees reaching skyward like silent sentinels. The desert didn't know time the way people did. It just remembered. Marshall Lynn walked it slower than before. Not from age, but from weight. Not physical. Something older. A hush clung to him, like the air before a confession. Orin followed quietly behind. No leash, no command, just choice. When they reached the top, the sun had started its slow descent, staining the sky in honeyed rust and violet. The wind whispered through Joshua trees, soft like breath over old wounds. The plaque hadn't shifted in the years Marshall had stayed away. Nathan Reyes Lynn, 1993, 2018. Where he ran toward danger. Others were given time to run from it. The words had once stung him like acid. Now they simply ached. Marshall knelt. Not to pray, not for forgiveness. He just needed the ground. His fingers traced the carved name, trembling. Then he took the letter from his coat pocket, the one Ava had found at the bottom of Nathan's footlocker, still creased from old folds, still faint with the scent of desert rain and gear oil. "Dad, if anything happens, take care of Orin. He saved more than lives, he saved me." That was all. Just one sentence. Marshall didn't cry immediately. His jaw clenched first. Shoulders stiffened, like he was bracing against some invisible recoil. But the letter stayed in his lap. And Orin, that battle-scarred shadow of a soul, sat down beside him. Not close enough to crowd, just near enough to say, "I'm here." When the tears came, they weren't bitter. They weren't even loud. They just were. Marshall wept not from guilt. He'd already bled that out of himself long ago, but from release. For the years he spent punishing the wrong soul. For the silence he wrapped around grief like armor. For the boy who ran into fire, and the dog who never left him. The wind shifted. It moved through them gently, stirring the edges of the letter, sweeping dust in lazy spirals around Orin's paws, like something old was letting go. When Marshall finally spoke, his voice cracked like broken gravel. "He always said you were more than a dog." Orin turned his head slightly, ears flicking forward, the same way he had once done when waiting for Nathan's command. "Guess I believe him now," Marshall whispered. They stayed like that, man and dog, as the last of the day bled into dusk, not facing the past, but sitting in it, together. The desert ridge caught the last warmth of the sun. Golden light spilled across the land like a final blessing, touching every branch, every paw print, every silent breath that once held pain and now held peace. Orin stood at the crest, wind brushing through his fur. He didn't wear a vest anymore. No leash, no number, no mission, except the one he chose. Below, the sanctuary exhaled. Tigers basked on sun-warmed stone, no longer restless. The young deer nosed at the fence edges, unbothered by predator scent. A fox drank from the artificial pond where months ago no life dared linger, and walking between them all, boots soft against gravel, hair tied back in a wind-snagged braid, was Lyra. She bent to check on the fox's paw, laughed as a rescued parrot mimicked her cough. Then she looked up, right at him. Orin didn't move, didn't need to. The way her face softened, that was enough. Behind him, Marcus's old truck rumbled faintly as it returned from a supply run. Ava's laughter drifted from the staff cabin porch. And Suri, the matriarch tiger, padded from the shade of a lone tamarisk tree and laid down not far from the fence that marked the edge of Orin's perch. She didn't look up. She didn't need to either, because some boundaries don't divide. They witness. The wind carried no tension now, just scent-clean hay, warmed fur, a trace of antiseptic and dust. No alarms, no gunfire, no thunder of boots or panicked cries, only the breath of a world healing. Orin shifted slightly, his joints stiffer these days, but still strong. His eyes scanned the perimeter, not from habit, but from devotion. Once, this place was a prison of ghosts. Now, it was his patrol, his home, his command. And in that golden stillness before night's indigo crept in, he stood not as a dog of war nor an outcast of sorrow, but as the quiet pulse of everything that had survived, everything that had stayed. The sanctuary didn't belong to one man anymore, not Marshall, not Ava, not even Lyra. It belonged to the ones who chose to remain when the cages opened, the ones who kept watching long after the danger passed, the ones who remembered. Orin turned his head, one last sweep across the land below. Fences, stripes, hooves, feathers, laughter, and love. He let out a low, steady breath, the kind that said, "All is well." Then he sat, paws steady in the sand, a sentinel, a survivor, a heart among beasts. In a world that often forgets the silent heroes, Orin's story reminds us love, loyalty, and healing transcend words, species, and even scars. He was once a ghost of duty discarded after doing everything right, but through one act of quiet defiance, one bond with a kind soul, he became something far greater, the heartbeat of a sanctuary, the bridge between predator and peace. This story isn't just about a dog. It's about every creature who's been misjudged, every being who's been pushed aside because of grief, fear, or misunderstanding. It's a call to remember that animals are not just survivors of our world, they're partners in our healing. German shepherds, in particular, have long stood beside us, through storms, through war, through silence. Not because they are trained to, but because they choose to. Let us honor them not with cages, but with compassion. Not with commands, but with connection. And let us remember, sometimes the most powerful leaders walk on four legs and carry the weight of love with quiet strength. Protect them, learn from them, love them, because in doing so we just might become better versions of ourselves.